Who raised you more, your parents, your grandparents, or someone else?
When my parents told me they were taking my little sister to a wellness resort for a long weekend and asked me to hold down the house, I didn't even pause before saying yes. I'd done it before, and if we're being honest, it had become a running theme in my life, me being the safe fallback option while everyone else ran off chasing their next big moment of joy, self-care, or escape. It sounded simple enough. Water the plants, feed the dog, and make sure the Wi-Fi stays on because Amber, my sister, had some kind of live-streamed breathwork workshop scheduled for Monday. Nothing unusual. Just another weekend of quiet inside the same creaky suburban house I'd grown up in, except now I slept in the guest room, and my toothbrush lived in a cup labeled Emily, like I was a visitor at my own childhood home. I didn't take it personally anymore. Not really. After my divorce 2 years ago and a failed attempt at starting fresh in a one-bedroom apartment with mold in the ceiling and roaches that had more attitude than my ex-husband, moving back home seemed like the lesser evil. My parents made a decent show of being supportive, but there was always an undercurrent of subtle judgment, like they never expected me to need them again after 35. Like I had failed quietly, and this house, this temporary refuge, was a favor I shouldn't overstay. Still, I paid rent. I covered groceries. I fixed the goddamn garbage disposal myself after Frank couldn't find the time. I wasn't freeloading. I was surviving. Barely. So, when Linda, my mom, floated the idea over breakfast, between sips of her turmeric latte and the daily New York Times horoscope, about the three of them going on a last-minute 4-day retreat to Sedona, Arizona, I just nodded. She made it sound like a family bonding trip, but it was clear from her phrasing that I wasn't invited. Amber needed some soul healing after a recent breakup with a vegan crypto guy named Jackson. You wouldn't like it anyway, my mom added with a little wave of her hand. Too much sage and not enough sarcasm for your taste. My dad chuckled, the same empty chuckle he always used when he didn't really want to engage. They packed light. Matching luggage. Amber wore her white Namaste all day hoodie and had that far-off influencer expression, the one that says, "I am the main character of my healing journey," while ignoring the trail of chaos behind her. She barely said goodbye. My mom reminded me to lock up each night, and my dad mumbled something about checking the mail. Then they were gone. A weekend to myself. No drama. No lectures. Just me, the dog, and a half-finished bottle of wine. The first 2 days were fine. Peaceful even. I took long showers without someone knocking on the door asking about laundry cycles. I cooked what I wanted, played podcasts too loud, and let the dog sleep on the couch without Linda giving me the look. I even started feeling human again, until Sunday afternoon, when I decided to run out for groceries. It was a quick trip, less than an hour, just milk, eggs, and whatever coffee was on sale. I remember standing in the cereal aisle debating between the organic granola my mom insisted on and the off-brand corn flakes I actually liked, when something hit me in the chest, this stupid, tiny burst of gratitude. Gratitude that I still had this space, this sliver of comfort, even if it wasn't really mine. I came back with 3 bags in my arms, my key in hand, the dog wagging at the window. But when I tried the front door, the key wouldn't turn. Not jammed. Not stuck. Just wrong. As if the lock had been changed. I tried again, slower this time, thinking maybe I grabbed the wrong key off the hook. But it was the same one I always used. I knocked. Nothing. Called my mom. No answer. Amber's line went straight to voicemail. My dad? Voicemail. I walked around to the back, hoping maybe the patio door had been left unlocked, but no, same story. All sealed tight. I sat on the porch for a minute, thinking maybe it was some weird maintenance thing. Maybe they had work done while they were gone and forgot to tell me. Maybe it was a mistake. But that creeping cold feeling started sliding into my gut. Something wasn't right. I took out my phone and opened my Dropbox folder, the one where I'd stored all the lease paperwork from when I moved in. The agreement that said I was a resident family member and legally allowed to occupy the premises. But the folder was empty. No files. Just a single document named Template Lease, old. I searched my email. Nothing. Scanned my physical folders in the back of my car. Nothing. I tried calling my parents again. Nothing. It was getting dark, and the porch light didn't even flick on automatically like it used to. I sat there in my own driveway, holding 3 grocery bags, realizing I had nowhere to go, and not a single person who would pick up the phone. That night, I stayed with Marissa, my old college roommate, who still lived across town and never asked too many questions. I told her something weird was going on at my parents' house, and she handed me a beer and said, "I always knew your mom was a bit extra." I didn't sleep much. I kept going over it in my head. Was this an accident? Some kind of miscommunication? Or did they deliberately change the locks and just forget to mention it? The next morning, I called the landlord. Or, at least, the man I thought was the landlord. Mr. Beckman. He'd owned the place for years, and my parents had dealt with him since I was a teenager. I got his number from an old rent receipt and dialed, heart pounding like I was reporting my own break-in. He picked up after 3 rings. Friendly enough. I explained the situation and asked if something had changed, maybe a new policy, maybe new locks for safety. There was a pause. Then he said, in the kind of tone that tells you this is going to hurt, I sold that property 2 weeks ago. Didn't your folks tell you? For a second, the world tilted. I asked him again. He repeated it, slower this time. I sold it. It's not under my management anymore. New owner already took over. I stood there in Marissa's hallway, phone in hand, and every assumption I'd been clinging to for the last 2 years fell apart like wet paper. I wasn't just locked out. I was locked out of my life. And the worst part? I had no idea who owned the house now. Or why my parents had acted like none of this was a big deal. And that's when the real story began. By the time I sat up in bed the next morning, sunlight bleeding in through the unfamiliar beige curtains in Marissa's guest room, my entire body felt like it had aged 10 years overnight, not because the mattress was uncomfortable or the room too cold, but because my mind had not stopped spinning since I'd spoken to the landlord, and every thought led back to the same paralyzing conclusion. I had been evicted from my own life, and I hadn't even seen it coming. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling with the kind of dread that doesn't scream. It just presses down like water over your face, quiet and suffocating, until every breath feels stolen. It wasn't just about the locks being changed or the paperwork disappearing. It was the way the silence from my parents hung heavy and deliberate, like a long pause that meant more than any excuse ever could. No missed calls. No apologetic texts. Just stillness. It was the kind of silence that isn't born out of forgetfulness or accident. It's built, brick by brick, with full intention. I finally rolled out of bed, thanked Marissa again without really explaining much, just enough to pass for sane, and drove back across town with this tight, metallic taste in my mouth. The kind that settles when you know you're heading toward a confrontation, but don't yet know what kind of blood it'll draw. My old neighborhood looked the same on the surface, lawns trimmed, flags hanging off porches, wind chimes swaying in the warm breeze, but as I pulled up to the driveway, I saw it immediately. My parents' car was parked in its usual spot, perfectly centered, like nothing had happened. As if they had just returned from a casual brunch, not from appending my entire reality. I parked across the street and watched for a moment, waiting to see who would walk out first. I don't know what I was hoping for, a sign, a face in the window, a slip-up, but nothing came. So I got out, walked up to the door like a stranger, and rang the bell. The sound echoed inside. Muffled footsteps approached, slow and steady, and then the door swung open to reveal my mother standing there in a beige wrap sweater and yoga pants, a protein smoothie in one hand and absolutely no trace of guilt on her face. "Emily," she said, like she'd just run into me at a grocery store instead of at the threshold of what used to be my home. "You're up early." I stared at her, searching her expression for a flicker of acknowledgement, anything resembling remorse or even basic human awareness. "The locks," I said. "They've been changed." She blinked slowly, then offered a tight-lipped smile that almost passed for sympathy. "Yes, well, we had to update the security system. It's all smart-locked now. Amber had it installed while we were gone." My throat tightened. "Without telling me?" At that moment, my father walked in from the kitchen, holding the TV remote, as if nothing in the world had shifted under any of our feet. He said, casual and vacant, "You get that almond milk you like?" I wanted to scream, to tear the house apart room by room, demanding someone point out where reality had broken loose, but instead I just stepped inside uninvited, my voice low and sharp. I talked to Beckman. He said the house was sold. There it was, the first crack. My mom's mouth twitched slightly, her smoothie hand still as a statue. "Well," she said, dragging the word out like a yoga breath, "that was supposed to be a conversation we'd have together. We just ran out of time." "Who owns it now?" I asked, and when they didn't answer, I turned to my dad, who always gave in when pressed. He cleared his throat, scratched the side of his neck, and said, "Technically, Amber does." Amber. Of course. Amber, with her Instagram-perfect lifestyle and hollow affirmations. Amber, who once left a gas burner on for 12 hours and blamed Mercury retrograde. Amber, who couldn't keep a plant alive, but was now apparently trusted with full ownership of a 2-story family home. I couldn't even find the right words at first. My hands went cold, and every syllable came out like a blade. "You gave her the house." "It made the most sense," my mother replied, moving past me into the living room, her tone maddeningly calm, like she was explaining why she switched brands of detergent. "She's building a business. She needed a headquarters. A base for retreats. And let's be honest, Emily, you were never planning to stay forever." "But I was living here," I shot back. "I paid rent. I paid for groceries. I unclogged the septic system when it flooded last spring while Amber was in Tulum on a spiritual cleanse. And none of that counted." My mom didn't answer right away. My dad muttered something about it being a tough call. Then, from behind me, Amber's voice cut through the air like a blade through silk, light and syrupy. "It's not personal, Em. It's just business. You were kind of in between lives. I needed something solid." I turned and saw her standing on the stairs in a silk robe, sipping kombucha like a trophy wife on a Tuesday morning. That was the moment everything inside me snapped, not in a loud, crashing kind of way, but in the quiet, precise unraveling of someone who has been holding her breath too long. "You forged documents, didn't you?" I asked, suddenly calm, too calm. "That's how you made the sale happen without me knowing?" Amber tilted her head, almost pitying. "You were never on the deed, Emily. Legally, you weren't even a tenant." That was the nail in the coffin, the truth no one wanted to say aloud. I had assumed the lease I signed with my parents years ago held legal weight, that my contributions meant something, but in the end, I was just a temporary presence in a permanent structure I didn't own and was never meant to. I left without slamming the door, without shouting, because there's a specific kind of rage that doesn't rise, it sinks. It roots itself deep in the bones, where it simmers and waits. I sat in my car, engine off, and stared at the house I'd once called home, knowing that behind those walls, my family was already planning their next move, their next post, their next lie. I called Derek next, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. My ex. The man I had once imagined growing old with before everything went sideways. He worked in real estate now, and I remembered, in a flash of clarity, that his name had come up last Christmas when Amber talked about renovation consulting. He answered on the third ring, his voice casual. "Hey, Emily. I didn't have time for pleasantries. Did you broker the deal for my parents' house?" There was a pause. A long one. And then, very quietly, he said, "I did. I thought you knew." And that was when I realized I wasn't just betrayed by my family. I was outplayed. Systematically. And it was time to start playing back. There's a particular kind of numbness that comes after betrayal, not the loud, theatrical sort that explodes into tears or shattered glass, but the kind that drapes itself across your shoulders like wet wool, heavy, itchy, and impossible to shake off. That was the feeling I carried with me the entire drive back to Marissa's place, one hand clenched around the steering wheel, the other gripping my phone like a lifeline I wasn't sure I'd even want to use again. Derek's voice still echoed in my ears, low and casual, as if confirming your role in someone's quiet ruin was just another Tuesday. I thought you knew. That phrase clung to the back of my throat like smoke, and the more I turned it over in my head, the more I realized how deep this betrayal actually went, not just emotional, but coordinated, premeditated, and disturbingly professional. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on Marissa's couch with my laptop open and my brain moving in slow, deliberate circles. I started digging, not just out of spite, though there was plenty of that, but out of a desperate need to understand how a woman like my sister, who once forgot her own email password for 3 consecutive months, had orchestrated a real estate transfer, formed a business entity, and convinced our parents to rewrite family history while smiling through collagen lip masks. I typed Harper Wellness LLC into a business registry database, expecting nothing or maybe just a placeholder, but what I found made the hair rise on the back of my neck. Harper Wellness had been registered 8 months ago, with Amber listed as CEO and a secondary managing partner listed under a different name, one I didn't immediately recognize. The address matched the house. The email domain was custom. The website was live, bright pastels, stock photos of young women in forest glades, and inspirational taglines like, "Heal in the space where your soul first learned to feel." She had even written a blog post titled Reclaiming Sacred Spaces, where she talked vaguely about ancestral trauma and letting go of stagnant energies, clearly referencing me, though never by name. Her entire brand was built on the bones of our shared history, whitewashed into something profitable and palatable for bored suburban moms with disposable income and too many indoor plants. I scrolled through the site, my stomach tightening with every new detail: packages for weekend retreats, rates for private sessions, testimonials from beta clients who had transformed their lives after just one chakra alignment. She had photos of the living room, now gutted of our family furniture and replaced with floor cushions, houseplants, and a long wooden altar draped in scarves. The kitchen had been renovated with clean white tiling, open shelves, and one of those ridiculous water filters shaped like a crystal tower. It was the same house I grew up in, but sterilized, commodified, and entirely hers. It wasn't just the redecoration or the spiritual branding that bothered me, it was the precision of the erasure. There wasn't a single photo, memory, or reference to the life that had existed there before. It was as if I had never lived there, never cried in that hallway during high school breakups, never painted the baseboards during that one summer my parents tried to renovate on a budget. She had scrubbed me out of our shared story with the efficiency of someone who had rehearsed it 100 times in her head before executing it. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't just a power grab. It was a performance. Amber had built a personal empire on the illusion of healing, but underneath it all was a ruthless instinct to dominate, to win, to rewrite reality so thoroughly that no one would ever question her version of events. And I had been too distracted, too beaten down by life, to see it coming. I spent the next day piecing together the paper trail. I found the forged lease termination notice, backdated and slipped into an email chain that I had apparently been CC'd on but never actually received. I found my signature on a document I had never seen before, and when I zoomed in, I could tell immediately that it had been traced from a scanned version of an old tax return. Amber, or someone she had paid, had gone through the trouble of lifting my signature from a government form just to make her little wellness dream more airtight. The secondary managing partner listed on the LLC? A shell name. But after a few hours of obsessive searching, I connected it back to Derek's cousin, a man who specialized in quietly flipping properties to boutique startups. It was all there, if you knew where to look. The paperwork, the money transfers, the permits, all signed and filed in a way that made it almost impossible to untangle. But not quite. I went cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from fear, but the kind that settles in when you've moved past the point of heartbreak and entered the realm of strategy. Because that was the moment I realized I didn't just want justice, I wanted to hit back with the same elegance and cruelty they had used against me. So I started small. I joined her newsletter under a fake name. I registered for one of her upcoming retreats using a prepaid card and a burner email. I followed all her social media accounts from a clean new profile and watched the way she prepped for her launch, sharing sneak peeks of the backyard being converted into a meditation garden, offering early access codes to her most loyal followers and teasing a deep reveal for opening weekend. Amber had no idea I was watching. No clue that I was collecting screenshots, documents, evidence. She was too busy curating her image, posing barefoot in the living room I once decorated with hand-me-downs, using phrases like generational rebirth, while sipping green juice out of mason jars. She thought she had won. She thought I was gone, erased, an afterthought. But what she didn't understand, what she never understood, was that I had always been the one who watched quietly from the sidelines, memorizing every move, learning patterns, waiting for the exact right moment to strike. And now, with everything they had built balanced on a foundation of lies, vanity, and bad paperwork, I finally saw the crack. All I had to do was widen it. And when the empire fell, because it would fall, I planned to be standing exactly where they had left me, just outside the door, holding the receipts. Revenge, I've come to learn, is not the hot, furious blaze the movies always promised. It's slower, colder, and far more surgical. It starts not with fire, but with patience, precision, timing. And most importantly, it begins when you're willing to let go of the hope that the people who wronged you will one day wake up and apologize. Once that fantasy dies, you're finally free to stop playing the wounded daughter and start becoming the predator they never saw coming. For me, that realization settled into my bones while I stared at Amber's latest Instagram story, where she twirled barefoot across the living room floor of our old home, the very space where I once had my 16th birthday party. Now decorated with imported Turkish rugs and hanging eucalyptus, speaking to her followers about reclaiming energy from inherited emotional burdens. If she wanted to talk about inheritance, I was ready to speak her language, just not in the way she expected. Her first wellness retreat, according to the newsletter I had subscribed to under the name Claudia T., divorced Pisces looking to reconnect with her feminine core, was scheduled for the coming weekend. It was described as an intimate soul-centered immersion limited to 8 women, handpicked through a questionnaire that was so laughably superficial I managed to get accepted within 12 hours after submitting phrases like unhealed root chakra and fear of masculine structures into the text fields. I paid in full using a prepaid debit card Marissa helped me load at a gas station. I borrowed one of her more ethereal-looking outfits, flowy linen pants, a cotton wrap, and a pair of sandals with cork soles, and booked a rental car under the same fake identity. If I was going to infiltrate Amber's empire, I had to play the part of the broken, naive woman searching for peace. The irony, of course, was that I didn't need to fake that part too hard. When I arrived on Friday afternoon, the front door of what was once my home was framed with hanging vines and a garland made of crystals and feathers, and a wooden sign by the driveway read, "Welcome to Sacred Harbor." I had to resist the urge to rip it out of the ground and throw it through the bay window. Amber greeted each of us individually, dressed in a gauzy white dress that made her look like the ghost of a rich woman who had never worked a day in her life, her tones syrupy and tranquil, her smile plastic and permanently perched at the corners of her mouth. When she reached me, she said, "Claudia, right? So glad you're here. Your energy feels very open." I smiled, bowed slightly, and told her I was ready to heal. She nodded as if I'd just spoken the secret password and led me inside. The house had been scrubbed clean of everything that once made it ours. No family photos, no signs of my parents' dated furniture, no trace of the old carpet my mother swore she'd replace for 10 years and never did. It smelled like Palo Santo and overpriced lavender oil. In the kitchen, there were trays of vegan finger food and mason jars, filled with cucumber water, labeled with affirmations. Each guest was given a sacred space assignment, which essentially meant we were each assigned to a different corner of the house, rebranded as energy zones. I was placed in the grounding room, which had once been the guest room I slept in when I first moved back after the divorce. The irony almost choked me. I waited until midnight, after everyone had gone to bed and Amber had retreated to her makeshift sanctuary loft, to begin. I took out the mini camera I'd hidden in a crystal-infused journal and placed it on a bookshelf with a perfect view of the hallway and office door. I then crept into the office itself, which used to be my father's den and now had been turned into Amber's administrative hub, and began my search. The desk was spotless, unnervingly so, with only a stack of branded folders and a rose gold laptop locked with a biometric fingerprint scanner. I bypassed it easily with a fake silicone fingerprint pad I'd ordered online weeks earlier after watching 5 hours of tutorials. I wasn't playing anymore. Inside, I found everything I'd hoped for and more. Copies of the power of attorney document she had claimed my father signed, conveniently witnessed by a woman I recognized as one of Amber's yoga students. There were bank transfer statements showing large payments routed through multiple accounts, clearly an attempt to launder her use of family funds. But most damning of all was an email thread between Amber, Derek, and the Shell Corporation's legal team, laying out the timeline for the sale and the strategy for phasing me out cleanly to avoid any emotional backlash. In one email, Derek wrote, "Emily won't push back. She never does. She'll either sulk or disappear." I stared at that line for a long time, every word slicing deeper than the last, not because it surprised me, but because I knew he had been right until now. I copied everything onto a drive, took backup photos, and returned the files exactly as I'd found them. No evidence. No noise. Just a quiet exhale as I stepped back into my designated mattress on the floor, grounding space, pretending to meditate while every cell in my body pulsed with adrenaline. The next morning, we had a group breath work session in what used to be the backyard, now converted into a sacred garden filled with salt lamps and hammocks. Amber led the session barefoot, humming through her nose and speaking in soft, droning mantras about transformation. I sat there with my eyes closed, imagining the flames of her perfect empire licking at her heels while she preached to her curated circle of lost women. During lunch, I casually struck up conversation with the other guests, asking seemingly innocent questions about their expectations, their experience so far, their knowledge of state regulations for wellness retreats operating on residential property. 2 of them, both from out of state, confessed they hadn't realized the retreat wasn't licensed, and another mentioned she hadn't signed any liability waiver. I made notes of every conversation, filed every red flag, and planted just enough doubt to seed a little discomfort. That was all I needed for now, small cracks in the surface. By the time I left on Sunday, hugging Amber goodbye with the fake warmth of 100 New Age phrases, I had collected nearly 32 gigabytes of data, 5 testimonials from participants willing to go on record if needed, and a folder of financial documents that linked her business back to misused family funds. I didn't feel victorious, not yet, but I felt something I hadn't in a long time: power. Cold, clean, and absolute. They had stolen my home, rewritten my story, erased my presence like I was some transient mistake they had to sweep under the rug. But what they didn't realize was that I had been watching, learning, and biding my time in the margins of their fantasy. They thought they had closed the door on me, but I had never stopped holding the key. And now I wasn't just coming back to reclaim what was mine. I was going to burn it all down. Revenge is a slow-boiling thing, and while it never quite fills the hole betrayal leaves behind, it has a way of warming the edges of that emptiness just enough to make you feel like you've taken a piece of yourself back from the people who thought they could strip it from you without consequence. That Monday morning, with my car still packed from the retreat and the hard drive containing every stolen document sitting like a live grenade in the passenger seat, I didn't feel victorious or even vindicated. Instead, I felt methodical, deliberate, and unshakably certain that whatever came next would not be an outburst, a scream, or a bitter post online. What I was building wasn't some emotional reaction, it was a controlled demolition. The first thing I did, before breakfast, before even brushing my teeth, was send an anonymous tip, well-worded, professional, and backed with screenshots, to the city inspector's office. I knew exactly how to phrase it because I had spent 3 hours the night before cross-referencing local zoning laws, occupancy codes, and health regulations. The retreat, I wrote, was operating as a commercial venture in a residentially zoned area, offering unlicensed wellness services, storing unregulated food products, and housing out-of-town guests overnight in a space not approved for short-term lodging. I attached photos of the backyard being used as an outdoor treatment area without permits, images of candle flames too close to flammable fabrics, and a PDF showing the lack of safety signage. I didn't need to say much more. The evidence spoke for itself. Then I sent a separate envelope, this time by certified mail, directly to the IRS, complete with a carefully curated packet outlining potential misreported income, improperly filed business expenses, and suspicious fund transfers that didn't align with Harper Wellness LLC's declared revenue streams. I didn't have access to every financial record, but I had just enough to suggest that something smelled off, and I knew that once the scent was out there, someone would follow it. But my favorite move, the one that made me feel something close to joy, was leaking a collection of documents and photos to a popular wellness industry blog known for calling out influencer scams. The writer, a former yoga teacher turned whistleblower, had built a reputation for slicing through fake positivity like a knife through chiffon, and I gave her everything she needed: exaggerated credentials, deceptive advertising, unlicensed services, and, of course, the cherry on top, proof that the entire property had been acquired under the guise of a family agreement that excluded one key member: me. The fallout didn't happen immediately. These things never do. But about 9 days later, as I sat on Marissa's porch with a cup of lukewarm coffee and a dull headache from too little sleep, I opened my phone and saw the headline: Instagram wellness guru under fire for illegal retreat operation in suburban home. Below it was a photo of Amber standing in the doorway of the house, one hand lifted as if she were mid-mantra, the caption reading, "Claims of healing, but questions of legality." It was brutal, clinical, and absolutely beautiful. Within 24 hours, sponsors began quietly pulling their affiliate links. A boutique skincare brand removed Amber's profile from their ambassador page. 2 retreat guests I had befriended during the weekend posted cryptic messages about reevaluating past experiences. And just as I had hoped, the city issued a cease and desist order pending investigation. That meant no more in-person retreats. No more backyard breathwork. No more monetizing nostalgia dressed up in spiritual language. But even that wasn't the final twist, because betrayal, like mold, has a way of seeping through layers you thought were solid. I had assumed Amber was the mastermind, and in many ways, she was, at least in the emotional manipulation, the performance, the branding. But when I dug deeper, peeling back another layer of property records and LLC filings I hadn't examined closely enough the first time, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. The house, our house, had never fully belonged to her. The ownership had passed briefly through Harper Wellness LLC, yes, but that company had quietly transferred it 2 months later to a new holding company registered out of state, with no public-facing officers listed. And that's when I found the name. Derek. Not directly, he was smarter than that, but his cousin, the same man listed as a consulting partner during the house's renovation phase, was also listed as managing member of the new holding company. The entire retreat center, the influencer empire, the family-friendly facade, none of it had ever really been in Amber's name for long. She had been a front. A glittering, yogic distraction while Derek made the real play behind the curtain. When I confronted him, not in person but through a message he couldn't ignore, a carefully worded legal inquiry I had a friend draft that questioned the legitimacy of the property transfer and suggested I might be pursuing civil action, he called me within 6 hours. His voice was the same measured tone I remembered from when we were still dating, and he was trying to lie without technically lying. "Emily," he said, as if we were still close, as if we hadn't spoken in weeks instead of years, "it's complicated. You don't understand the pressures Amber was under. Your parents, well, they needed to consolidate. She was the obvious face for that. But I never intended to hurt you." I laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from amusement, but the sharp, exhausted kind that bursts out when someone tries to sell you the same story that burned your life to the ground. I told him I wasn't interested in his explanation, just in the truth, and the truth was, they had used my silence as consent. They had built an empire on the assumption that I wouldn't push back, that I wouldn't fight. But I had. And they were losing. The final blow didn't come from me, it came from the market. When word spread that Harper Wellness was under investigation and the retreat space no longer operational, the house's value plummeted. Without Amber's online audience to support the brand, without the city's blessing to continue hosting events, and with the IRS sniffing around for undeclared income, the holding company quietly listed the property for sale. A private auction. No fanfare. No yoga mats left on the porch. I didn't buy the house back. I didn't need to. Somehow, that felt even better. Because in the end, I didn't want to live in a space that had been defiled by greed and vanity and false healing. I didn't want to sleep under the same roof where my family had sold my existence for a handful of hashtags and half a business plan. I had thought, at the start of all this, that reclaiming the house would mean reclaiming myself, but I realized now that who I was had nothing to do with drywall and floor plans. I walked away with nothing tangible. No property. No inheritance. No apology. But what I had was far more valuable. I had pulled the curtain back, exposed the machine, and watched them scramble to cover the wreckage they thought no one would ever see. I had been the ghost in the system they tried to erase, the name they deleted from the lease, the person they assumed would just fade into the background. But I didn't fade. I lingered. And when I finally left, I made damn sure the echoes of my footsteps would stay with them longer than anything they ever tried to build on stolen ground. And that, to me, was the only closure they deserved.